What if a simple school bus ride turned into a moment the whole town would never forget? A disabled bus driver is humiliated in front of children. The school suspends her. The town stays quiet. But then, strangers begin to appear at her door. And a familiar yellow bus returns, completely transformed. By the end of this story, you'll understand why veterans across the state came together for one woman. Stay with us to see how it ends, and don't forget to subscribe. Autumn in Benton Hill arrived with a blanket of morning fog and the earthy scent of harvested cornfields. The air carried a crispness that hinted at the coming frost, and the trees lining the quiet roads shed their leaves in slow, deliberate spirals. On the edge of town, nestled among a row of modest one-story homes, Jane McCarthy rose before the sun. Her alarm never rang. Her body simply remembered the hour. She moved with silent precision, the kind that only years of discipline could ingrain. Her morning ritual began in the same order each day. She brewed a single cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream. While it steeped, she peeled a boiled egg, sliced an apple, and lined up her vitamins. She ate standing by the window, watching as the first hints of light touched the tops of the barns and silos beyond the empty fields. After breakfast, she laced up her shoes and stepped outside into the misty air for a short jog, her breath visible in rhythmic bursts. The artificial joint in her left leg gave a faint metallic creak with each stride, but she paid it no attention. Pain, like silence, had long ago become background noise. Once back inside, she showered quickly, wrapped her stump in cloth, and secured the prosthetic. She dressed in her uniform, dark slacks, a light blue shirt, and a navy cap with a faded American flag stitched above the brim. Her movements were methodical, deliberate. The mirror offered no surprises. Her face, though worn by sun and memory, remained calm, unreadable. By 6:15 a.m., she had locked her front door and walked the short path to the school district's transportation lot. Her bus, number 17, waited in the second row, dew still clinging to the windows. Inside the garage, she signed in with a mechanical pencil and exchanged a silent nod with the mechanic who was always there but rarely spoke. Her inspection of the vehicle was thorough. Tires, lights, mirrors, brakes. She wiped the windshield from the inside, cleared the mirrors, and adjusted the seat. When she finally pulled out of the lot, the sky was still painted in deep blue and orange, and the town remained mostly asleep. Benton Hill wasn't large. The roads curved gently through residential streets and out toward the grain elevators and silos at the edge of town. One by one, the children climbed aboard. Some waved shyly, others mumbled greetings, but most simply found their seats and stared out the windows, their backpacks resting at their feet. Jane acknowledged each of them with a slight nod, hands steady on the wheel, eyes scanning the road. There was comfort in the repetition, in the exactness of the route. Each stop, each turn, every intersection had become part of a map she no longer needed to see. The rumble of the engine, the rattle of the windows, even the quiet murmur of children's voices formed a kind of music that grounded her. She kept the heater low, just enough to keep the glass from fogging. As she drove, the town came slowly to life behind her. Porch lights flicked on. Dogs barked in fenced yards. A jogger passed, lifting a hand in greeting. She dropped the last child off at the elementary school just after 7:30. The parking lot buzzed with teachers, crossing guards, and the occasional flurry of students running late. Jane watched the children disappear into the building, then turned the bus around and headed back to the garage. After parking, she spent 20 minutes wiping down the dashboard and side rails. She filled out the morning report, noted a slight rattle in the left side panel, and hung the keys on the board. No one stopped to talk to her. They rarely did. She preferred it that way. In Benton Hill, Jane McCarthy was known but not known. People saw the woman with the military bearing who drove the yellow bus every day, who never missed a shift, who wore the same cap in sun or snow. They respected her, even admired her quiet dependability. But they didn't ask questions, not about the limp, not about the past. And Jane never offered answers. In the silence that followed each completed route, she found something like peace, not joy, not comfort, but control. And for her, that was enough. In the evening, Jane returned to her house, a modest, well-kept one-story home with white siding and a narrow front porch. An American flag hung from a bracket by the door, its edges slightly frayed from the wind. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the flower beds empty now that summer had passed, and the walkway was swept clean of fallen leaves. There was no car in the driveway, only the soft imprint of old tire tracks. Inside, the house was quiet and orderly, filled with a stillness that felt deliberate. Her routine was always the same. She placed her keys in a small ceramic dish by the door, removed her cap, and lined her shoes against the wall with exact care. The living room was sparsely furnished, just a couch, a wooden coffee table, and a bookshelf with a few worn paperbacks and military memoirs. A folded flag sat in a glass case on the mantel. Above it hung a framed photo of her unit in Iraq, taken in the thick heat of a summer deployment. Dust clung to the edges of the glass, but she never wiped it off. In the photo, Jane stood near the center, her face streaked with sweat and grit, her eyes half shaded under the brim of her helmet. She looked at that photo every night, not out of sentimentality, but because it anchored her. There was a kind of painful steadiness in remembering where she had been. The desert heat came back in flashes, dry wind cutting across the skin, the clatter of gear against armor, the silence that settled over everything right before the world erupted. She remembered the metallic tang in the air after an explosion, the way sand found its way into every seam, and the acrid sting of burned rubber and fear. One memory came back more often than the rest. Her last patrol. A road they had driven a dozen times. A detour, barely noticeable, a shimmer in the distance. Then the blast, a single moment that tore through steel and bone and air, the sound deafening, the light blinding, and then the darkness that followed. She woke up in a military hospital in Germany, her left leg gone from the knee down, her hearing muffled, her thoughts scattered. Later, at a rehabilitation center in California, the doctors spoke in careful, rehearsed tones. They told her she would walk again, that prosthetics had come a long way. They showed her models and diagrams and spoke of independence and resilience. But no one spoke of the silence, the hours she would spend lying awake, listening to her heartbeat echo in a room that no longer felt like hers. No one mentioned how loud the memories would be when the world grew quiet. Her life after discharge had shrunk into something simple. She had chosen Benton Hill for its quiet, for the anonymity it offered. She didn't attend the annual parades. She avoided crowded events and turned down invitations from neighbors. She didn't go to church, though there was one just a block away. Her social circle consisted of brief nods at the grocery store and the occasional small talk with the mechanic at the bus depot. Her world narrowed to the essentials: her home, the school bus, and a wooden bench beside a small pond at the edge of town. Sometimes on Sundays, she sat there with a thermos of tea, watching ducks drift across the water, her prosthetic leg extended straight, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. And yet, in the presence of the children, something shifted. When she drove the morning route, she smiled, not out of obligation, but because she saw something pure in them, something untouched by war or grief. They trusted her without question. They climbed aboard the bus with sleepy faces and messy hair, handed her drawings, asked her questions. Some waved goodbye with both hands. In their eyes, she was steady, capable, whole. They didn't notice the prosthetic, or if they did, they never mentioned it. They simply accepted her. That acceptance, quiet and unspoken, filled a space in her that nothing else had. It gave shape to her days and softened the weight of memory. With them, she was not the soldier who had lost something. She was the driver, the woman who always arrived on time, the one who knew every bump in the road, every stop, every child by name. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. The afternoon sun had dipped just low enough to cast long shadows across the sidewalks of Benton Hill. Jane arrived at the elementary school parking lot at precisely 3:30 p.m., her bus clean and quiet, its doors folding open with a gentle hiss. The children filed in with their usual chatter and heavy backpacks. She greeted them with a nod as they passed, her eyes checking off each familiar face. The first part of the route unfolded as it always did. Stop by stop, she guided the bus through calm neighborhoods and familiar intersections. The engine hummed beneath her feet, steady and predictable. The younger children sat near the front, their legs too short to reach the floor, while the older ones migrated toward the back, where whispers and giggles usually lived. About 15 minutes into the route, two boys climbed aboard at an unassigned stop near a gas station. Jane's eyes narrowed in the rearview mirror. They weren't on the roster. One of them was Brandon Carver, the well-dressed son of a prominent local contractor. The other, Eric, was known to most in town as a troublemaker, a lanky teen with a hollow stare and a home life wrapped in court orders and second chances. Neither belonged on her bus. They took their seats near the middle, louder than anyone else. Within minutes, their voices rose above the rest. Brandon leaned back with his arms stretched across two seats, laughing hard at his own jokes. Eric had his phone out, filming parts of the ride, pointing the camera at younger kids who flinched under his gaze. One of them tore the wrapper off a chocolate bar and tossed it underfoot, the foil landing inches from a first grader's sneakers. Jane's hand tightened on the wheel. She glanced up into the mirror, locking eyes with Brandon. Her expression was flat, warning. He looked away, grinning. The ride grew tenser. Brandon began mocking the younger students, mimicking their voices, inventing stories about what their parents did. Eric chimed in with crude remarks. When the bus reached the corner of Mulberry and 4th, Jane slowed to a stop. The intersection was quiet, save for a few crows overhead. As she prepared to move again, Brandon suddenly shouted toward the front of the bus, tossing out a sarcastic comment laced with disdain. The tone was sharp, deliberate, aimed not just at her authority, but at her identity. Eric followed with a louder jab, this one directly targeting her leg. The words cut through the bus like a wire snapping under pressure. For a moment, the air seemed thinner. One of the smaller children near the front began to cry softly, pulling her hoodie up over her head. Jane's mouth tightened, but she said nothing at first. She slowed the bus and gave a curt instruction to maintain order. Their response was laughter, loud, unrestrained, and mocking. As the bus turned onto Grant Avenue, Jane prepared to stop again. Her focus stayed on the road ahead, trying to block out the rising noise behind her. But then, just as she slowed to open the doors for a scheduled stop, Eric shot forward from his seat without warning. He reached across the console and yanked the emergency release handle for the front door. The doors flung open with a jolt. Jane lost balance, her left shoulder slamming against the metal panel beside her seat. The pain was immediate but dull, absorbed into muscle memory. She caught herself before falling fully to the floor, her prosthetic leg slightly twisted under the seat. Gasps rose from the children. One screamed. Brandon and Eric burst out of the bus, sprinting down the sidewalk, laughing and still filming. Their footsteps echoed briefly before disappearing into the late afternoon quiet. The bus remained still, hazard lights blinking, casting orange reflections against the faded pavement. Inside, no one moved. The children sat frozen, unsure. Jane inhaled, steady and deep. Her right hand found the edge of her seat. She pushed herself upright, her jaw set, her body stiff. An 8-year-old boy named Kevin, sitting in the first row, stood hesitantly and reached out a small hand. Jane took it without hesitation. With effort, she regained her seat. She reached up to switch on the flashing lights, then reset the door mechanism. The bus creaked as it eased back into gear. Not a word was spoken. The rest of the drive passed in near silence. She delivered each child to their home, waiting patiently as they stepped down with lowered heads and unsure glances. By the time she parked the bus in the lot and signed her sheet, the sun had nearly set. Her shoulder ached beneath her jacket, and the dull throb in her leg returned with each step, but her expression remained unreadable. No complaints, no questions, just the steady hum of a woman who had seen far worse and would not be shaken by two boys who thought pain was entertainment. The following morning, a video began circulating on social media. It was grainy, filmed vertically, and only a minute long. It showed the moment Jane lost her balance in the driver's seat, the laughter in the background sharp and callous, the boys fleeing down the sidewalk with their phones raised like trophies. The caption beneath the post was crude, laced with mockery, and within hours it had been shared across local feeds. The comments ranged from amusement to outrage, though most in town read silently, brows furrowed behind screens, unsure how to respond. The video reached more than Benton Hill. It found its way to inboxes, group chats, and quiet corners of the internet where people still cared about respect. One of the viewers was Thomas Harper, a retired Army sergeant who now worked at a nearby grain facility. He didn't watch it twice. As soon as he recognized Jane and his son Kevin in the front row of the bus, he made a call, then another. By nightfall, 3 of his former squad mates had seen the footage too. At the school district office, the reaction was measured but immediate. Jane was contacted late in the afternoon and informed she would be placed on temporary administrative leave. The decision, they said, was to allow for a full review of the incident and protect the integrity of student safety. The phrasing was cold, formal, the kind used to pad liability. Jane listened, said nothing, and ended the call. She did not argue. That evening, she sat in the living room with the lights off, the curtains drawn. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but inside, time felt suspended. Her phone vibrated twice, then stopped. She turned it off and placed it face down on the table. The silence in the house was thick, not peaceful but weighted, familiar in the worst way. By the second day, something began to shift. It started quietly. A dusty pickup truck pulled into her driveway mid-morning. The man who stepped out was older, wearing a battered cap with a Marine Corps emblem and a denim jacket faded from years of use. He didn't knock. He left a box on her porch and drove away. Inside the box were military patches, each one stitched and worn, arranged carefully in a grid. No note, just the weight of gesture. Later that afternoon, a black SUV arrived. A woman stepped out in National Guard fatigues. She didn't approach the house, only tucked a folded piece of paper beneath the welcome mat, and stood in silence for a moment before returning to her vehicle. The paper held a short message, just a name, a rank, and the words, "We see you." Jane saw none of it in real time. She stayed inside, the house dim and still, watching the world through the filtered light of closed blinds. But the gestures piled up. A bouquet of daisies left in a mason jar, a coffee thermos wrapped in a note from a parent she barely knew, a laminated drawing from a child with the words, "Thank you for keeping us safe." She placed them all in a line along the windowsill, unsure whether to feel comforted or exposed. The town, for the most part, didn't speak openly about what happened. The coffee shop buzzed with vague references. At the hardware store, murmurs floated behind shelves. In church bulletins and PTA meetings, the incident was never named, but it hung in the air, unspoken, yet omnipresent. Parents made quiet calls to the district. Some demanded Jane be reinstated. Others asked for an apology. A few offered legal support if she needed it. No marches, no headlines. Just phone calls, flowers, and the growing recognition that something wrong had happened, and that someone good had paid the cost of silence. Jane remained quiet. Not because she didn't have words, but because none of them seemed worth saying. She had seen this before, not in a bus or a small town, but in distant cities and foreign dust. When something terrible occurred, people often froze, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how to act. That hesitation had a weight all its own. What hurt wasn't the physical bruise on her shoulder or the sharp twist in her leg. It was the sense of repetition, the feeling that once again, cruelty had unfolded in front of witnesses and the room had remained still. The echo of inaction rang louder than any insult. And so she sat, her days marked by the passing shadows on her living room wall and the occasional tap of something new left at her door. In that deep, stretching silence, she felt not forgotten, but suspended, like time was waiting for her to decide whether she would step back into the world or turn away for good. On Saturday morning, Jane stepped out onto her porch into the cool air. The sky was pale, the sunlight still gathering strength as it stretched across the rooftops of Benton Hill. Across the street, several dark-colored SUVs were parked in a neat line outside the neighbor's house. Men stood in a quiet circle on the lawn, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes, but with unmistakable bearing. Their postures were relaxed but intentional, and their voices low. One of them held a toolbox. Another carried a small stack of envelopes. One man broke away from the group and walked slowly toward Jane's porch. He was tall, built like a man who had once worn armor but no longer needed it to command presence. His hands were rough, scarred, and steady. When he reached her steps, he didn't speak. He offered a short nod and extended the bundle of letters. Then he turned and returned to the group without waiting for acknowledgement. Jane stood there for a long moment, the envelopes pressed against her side, her eyes scanning the stillness around her. She went back inside and set the bundle on the kitchen table. The letters varied in size and ink, some written in careful cursive, others in childlike scrawl. She opened the first one, written on wide-ruled notebook paper, crumpled at the corners. It simply said, "Thank you for being brave. I want to be like you." Another came from a mother she vaguely recognized from school drop-offs, expressing admiration and guilt. One more, written in blocky capital letters, read, "You're the kind of person I trust with my child's life." Others were from veterans, some signed only with rank and year of service. One read, "You stood for more than just rules. You stood for every one of us who came home different." Jane laid them out across the table, aligning them edge to edge like puzzle pieces that didn't need to fit perfectly to belong together. Later that morning, 3 pickup trucks pulled into the school's transportation lot. The same men from the lawn climbed out carrying rags, buckets, extension cords, and a small pressure washer. They moved with silent coordination, each man falling into a task without needing instruction. They washed every window of the school bus. They scrubbed the tires, wiped the mirrors, and polished the yellow paint until it gleamed in the sunlight. One man climbed the side of the bus and affixed a small American flag to the driver's side mirror. Another placed a brass plate on the seat, engraved with 5 words, "Driven by a veteran, respect the route." No one called the local paper. No one posted photos. They left without ceremony, locking the garage and leaving the bus ready for Monday. When Jane arrived at the lot early that morning, she noticed the difference immediately. The bus looked almost new. Her seat, adjusted to the precise angle she preferred, now bore the small plaque. She traced its edge with her fingers, then placed her thermos beside it. The ride began as it always did. Quiet roads, blinking lights, the engine's familiar rhythm. But when she pulled up to the first stop, something had changed. The children boarded in silence, but not out of discomfort. Their eyes met hers with a kind of cautious reverence, the way children look at something they've only recently come to understand as sacred. They found their seats more quietly than usual. There was no pushing, no teasing. The first boy on board, a small second grader with wide glasses and untied sneakers, handed her a folded piece of construction paper. It was a drawing. In the picture, a woman with short brown hair sat behind the wheel of a large yellow bus. On her chest, drawn in gold marker, was a star. She didn't speak. She only nodded, placing the drawing on the dashboard where the sun would catch it. The route that day followed its familiar path. Trees passed in blur. Crosswalks and mailboxes came and went, but the silence inside the bus was different. It wasn't the heavy kind that followed injury or grief. It was a silence filled with understanding, with recognition. Something had shifted, not just in how they saw her, but in how she allowed herself to be seen. A month passed. The colors of fall deepened in Benton Hill, the trees shedding their final leaves as frost began to gather along window edges. In that time, something quiet but lasting took root. On Veterans Day, a new tradition emerged without official decree or instruction. School children lined the sidewalks leading from the town square to the elementary school, each holding small American flags or hand-drawn signs. Parents stood behind them, some with hands over hearts, others simply watching. The final vehicle in the modest parade was not a convertible or a marching band float. It was Bus 17. Jane drove at the rear of the procession, her eyes steady on the road, her hands relaxed on the wheel. Her cap was slightly tilted forward, her uniform the same simple one she had worn every day. Inside the bus, on the dashboard beside the heating vent, sat a laminated copy of the photograph from Iraq, the same one that had lived on her wall for years. It was now joined by smaller images, crayon drawings, thank you cards, and snapshots taken by students over the weeks since her return. The town didn't cheer loudly. There were no fireworks or banners. But as the bus passed, heads turned. Children waved, some saluted clumsily, others shouted her name. Jane didn't respond outwardly. Her gaze stayed on the road, but her knuckles didn't grip the wheel as tightly anymore. The following week, the city council voted to name the street in front of the school after her. The proposal passed unanimously, but Jane declined. She met with the mayor in private, shook his hand, and asked that they leave the signs as they were. What had been done, she said, didn't need a name. It needed to remain quiet, lived in, and true. Instead, the school added a quote to the brick wall just outside the main entrance. Painted in clean, even letters beneath a brass light fixture, it read, "Respect begins with the road, and this bus knows the way." There was no plaque with her name, only the words. Jane's routine remained unchanged. She continued to wake before dawn, brewing her coffee with the same measured steps. She checked the tires on the bus, tested the lights, wiped the windows with a clean towel. Her thermos sat in the same holder. Her seat still bore the plaque. The drawing from the boy with the gold star stayed taped to the dash, faded now at the corners. But there was a difference she couldn't ignore. As she passed through town each morning, people no longer glanced past her. They looked up. They nodded. They smiled. Children on bikes waved. Shopkeepers paused in the middle of sweeping their stoops to offer a small wave or a lifted coffee cup. It wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, but it was persistent, and it was real. Jane didn't seek praise. She didn't talk about what had happened. She still avoided interviews, still declined invitations. But what had once been a life lived in silence was now a road walked in quiet honor. She had become part of something larger, Not because of uniform or ceremony, but because she had endured with grace and steadiness. And the town understood. The path she drove each day was no longer just a school route. It had become a reminder of resilience, of strength worn without shouting, of dignity that asked for nothing and gave everything.